But what I'd like us to chat, and you don't have to look to me, we can jump back around to each other, is that comparison chart, though, to see if we could talk first about, and I realize it's a bit, we're overgeneralizing and whatever, but there was the work style of the digital native, the learning styles, like this thing about collaboration, motivation, views on authority, structure, and then they talked about information access. But some of those things, that what is the change perhaps, or what's different about, let's say, young people today versus older people in terms of the way that they look at things and interact? Who would like to jump in? You want to start, Peter?
So I'm interested. I'm sort of the generation between the two, so I'm negotiating these people. The thing I didn't agree with there was the competition one, right? Because it's all great, but I work with a bunch of people who really want to win. Yeah. And regardless, and they want to be rewarded. Maybe they want to be rewarded in non-traditional ways, but they want a big part of we were talking earlier how many people leaving school today are spending a couple of years in a large company and just going straight to forming their own company. Yeah. And my view of that is a lot of the reward of working in your own company is that your contribution is very visible and you win or lose yourself. So the competition piece is the piece that sort of stuck out for me as not being. Everything else
that they're as competitive as any generation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or any people. Did they define it perhaps a little differently? Is it more of the collective reward together? It's not just me succeeding, but my mate or something?
I think there's a sort of skepticism that there are experts anymore, right? There's a lot of self-confidence in this generation, which I really like, right? It's so there's this idea that if I want to go and reinvent the recording industry, I can do it, right? The fact that there's a bunch of people in students
no barrier
doesn't mean that they really know what they're doing any more than say I do. I use that just as an example.
Yeah.
Could I add on to that? I
Sure.
thought that was really a good comment. I think we tend to think about competition and collaboration as separate items.
Right.
Or almost opposed to each other. And I think one of the things that we're finding out right now is that that's not necessarily the case. That competition can happen through collaborative networks in a way. And matter of fact, in any large-scale project, it has to happen through collaborative networks.
So now, do we think it's just the nature of the world, or is it something infused about the technology and the nature of being engaged with this that is changing us?
Yeah, if I may jump in there.
Yeah.
There's an interesting parallel going on in the blogosphere. I've faced some resistance from my colleagues at the PI who don't like the idea of my linking to articles from the Seattle Times. But the blogging ethic is link to your competitors, share that knowledge, drive traffic in between, and I think what you just said, it is what the technology is enabling us to do, and people are realizing that you can be competitive, but also acknowledge and share. So a lot of blog posts end up being, hey, this person, made a really smart point, let me add to it. You're still competing with that other blog, but you're sharing the knowledge, which, contributes to the entire pool. I think there's a sense of bonding and networking there, and I'm kind of hoping that the newspaper industry kind of catches up a little bit to that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Are companies looking to the digital natives as not saviors perhaps, but really to take these new ideas and things?
I think the ones that are the most progressive are definitely. I see a lot of fear-based out there though that are just very skeptical and nervous of this kind of irreverent group that comes in not respecting authority, and but the ones that I think are the most progressive are really kind of seeking out and creating opportunities for people to really come in, bring new ideas, kind of break open the box. And look at how things can be done differently and better.
I just went through an exercise with one of my clients that was really fascinating. It was on collaboration and competition. And so we broke people into teams, and then we broke those teams into sub-teams, subgroups is what we called it. And we had them working on an exercise together, and I was just observing the different groups. And the groups that had people from my generation and older went immediately to competition. They were going against each other, even though the instructions had nothing about competition. It was just you had to get a certain number of rows of your number or your letter. And so they immediately were competing, trying to block one another, even though that was not part of the instructions. And there was another group that was highly millennials, and they figured it out. I mean, they were like, okay, how can we get the most and also allow you to get the most? And they figured the exercise out. And it was amazing to watch this, watching this internal battle of creating competition, because I think that is kind of the world that, when I entered the workplace, it was about,
about, beating somebody else to move up the ladder. And now it's more about how do we work together to come up with an outcome that's best for all of us. So I do see the collaboration thing. In a competition, I mean, we're still trying to get the most, but for all of us. And so that's kind of where I see the team play coming in.
So if you work at Google, what happens is your promotions and your performance review and all that stuff is decided by your peers. So I, as a manager, I get kind of 2 votes, and then each of the peers get sort of 1 vote. This is vaguely thing. And then a committee of people who probably don't know that person but have the same job function review all the data and say this person should get promoted or not. And so we're rewarding individuals because individuals succeed or fail so individually, but we create a motivation where the right behavior is to behave well with your peers. It's not to suck up to your boss. And sucking up to your boss is a losing strategy at Google. And that actually creates a really fun place to work.
One of the ways I've seen this play out in my students is with two types of behaviors they want more from me, and that's an increased transparency in how the decisions are made, and also greater participation in the decision making as well, and also even in the learning process as well at a certain point.
Let's talk about the nature of information and information resources and credibility and also the confidentiality and stuff like that. When you throw something out like that, what does that mean to your company or your organization? Because you're revealing, perhaps unintentionally, even if you're looking, if we know what Google's interested in, right? Because a bunch of Google employees, Googlers, or what did you guys? Googlers. Googlers are out there asking questions, and we could recognize that. Would that give us some insight into corporate strategy or something like that?
So the question you should be asking is the answer to every single question within your organization? And if the answer is yes, then fine. If the answer is no, then deal with the problems of asking outside your organization. I think we see this a lot. At Google, we have the Summer of Code, for example, where we ask people to go work on open source projects who are not our employees, but we say, these are problems we would like to solve. We don't have resources. You can either go work at McDonald's or we'll pay you to work on this problem. And we get computer science undergrads to work on them. Amazon's book reviews are a great example of this. Like, Amazon couldn't possibly hire enough book reviewers. So they go and ask the community to do it. I think what's really exciting is this whole prize mentality, like the Lunar X Prize, $20 million. The thing that's so cool about that is the winner will get $20 million and do a lot of great work. The people who come second, third, fourth will do the work for free. And society will benefit. And so these ideas that you can motivate people outside your organization to do things which you're interested in.
For the organization.
And it's all, again, it's enabled by people being willing to collaborate and form alliances more flexibly. And the technology allowing people to collaborate at a great distance.
So it's really redefining, in a way, community and alliances. I mean, I have a stake in Google doing a better job because I use Google so much. Therefore, I might be willing to contribute, or to Amazon, I look at those reviews.
I mean, there's some statistic of how many ads at TV, but you translate that to how many TV commercials, right? You can't grow up watching that many TV commercials and believe everything you're told.
Right. And where some of us had to learn that, they just knew it from the beginning because they've grown up with it and saw that.
So they're more comfortable, and it's easier for them to pick out what's genuine and what's true and what's false because they've had so much experience being faced with this just inundation of information and learning to be skeptical about it. So they're more comfortable swimming through those waters than I think other generations think.
And do you also agree with Bruce's comment that it's also because they've done so much gaming and things like that it's a gaming view of the world as well, which you always are skeptical and careful in the game, the bluffer and all those kinds of things.
I do think that makes sense because we are dealing with more crowds, more our communities.
Communities and crowds.
And we were saying, that they don't trust, we don't necessarily just assume, in the newspaper industry this is very relevant because the people are no longer saying, well, there's an editor over here, so I'm going to read this paper because it's an editor and he's smart and he's telling me what stories I should read. Now they're going to dig into Reddit and they're saying, why trust an editor? How do I know what the editor's about? I don't know who he is. I'm not his Facebook friend. I don't know what he's about. But I'm Facebook friends with all these people, and they're on Dig, and they're telling me this article's interesting. And being, recommended to something is becoming more valuable than just assuming that someone in a higher authority has that authority.
I think there's different ways of thinking about how information is construed in these two different populations or two different types of circumstances. The first one is that we're kind of used to, or at least digital immigrants might be more used to notions of information as a type of message. Right? Like we give a message and this is the type of content that you'll need to know and this is what I want to see you do. And this is why a lot of my teaching has been moved more towards project and research-based types of teaching, because then information then is not about the message, it's about the field of possible choices. And therefore the gaming metaphor ends up becoming really representative of a whole way of navigating a complex world.
Is there learning going on? Is there reflection? Or is it because of these distractions and things, they're not doing that?
I think that's I think you've hit on something that's been really something that I've been thinking quite a bit about, and it's actually changed a little bit how I teach. What I do now is when I give a lecture, I tend to highlight fewer points, and I try to build in participation time. So you have to build the reflection time in, and you have to include them in it, in a sense. And I found that to be actually quite successful. Then I can actually see them get visibly excited about learning. But it's a different way of delivery. And it's something, and it's you hone down what you want to say, and you figure out what you really want them to get out of this, and then you give your little lecture, and then you have to draw out comments and make them part of what's going on.
So we've actually faced this in the workplace. I remember when I was at Microsoft and we put wireless networks everywhere, and every meeting you'd be in, no one was paying attention because their laptop's open, they're checking mail. And at Google it's the same way, and we've tried various techniques to get around that. Nobody reads anything before you go to a meeting, so don't bother sending anything down. Eric Schmidt was interviewed recently, and he put an interesting spin on it, where he said, at Google we value velocity. Right? So getting answers quickly, getting decisions made quickly, trying things fast and iterating and so forth. So he says what appears rude in other culture, in other environments, like reading email while someone's talking, is just the cost of doing business at Google. And he relies on people to be smart enough to make the decision about the velocity aspect of I can deal with things immediately, and the am I paying enough attention aspect.
Maybe we should have started off here with turn all your cell phones on and turn your computers on. And then figure out, how do I, let me not just think about critical thinking at this point, but now jump to the paradigm, which is, how do I effectively teach in this environment? I mean, what is learning?
If the model of knowledge, instead of being one mind thinking deeply, it's one mind going, this is interesting, let me share it. Because my tweets this morning were from a couple comments made on the presentation that I thought, that's cool. So I probably could have spent that time thinking deeply about it, but instead I was like, ooh, got to share that.
I guess I'm struggling with a lot of this, and the thing that I'm going back to, and I've heard a couple of really interesting points, is I guess I'm asking myself the question, what if we're not wired differently? What if the students aren't wired differently at all?
Right.
In fact,
What if they're the same?
If we go back 10,000 years,
Right.
We could say humans 10,000 years ago were wired differently. Well, their job was to accumulate resources to themselves to survive and succeed. Values may change, but essentially human beings are about accumulating resources to themselves and succeeding in however they define that. And it just strikes me that maybe what's happened here, and Monica, you said something that I thought was interesting a few minutes ago, and so did Jim Mario, that what's changing is the cost equation here, the transaction cost of doing two things that are really important. One is finding information, and maybe they're related, and two is communicating that information. And in that context, what I'm really trying to do is succeed according to my values, and in terms of collaboration and working together, that's the cheapest thing for me to do now.
I think you were next. Is it Jay?
Jay? Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, I was at a recent meeting at the Pentagon, and everybody accepted as fighter pilots into Top Gun programs were kids who had played video games from the age of 3.
Interesting.
And nobody else made it if they just picked up games later. And so it's probably specific context that everybody's wired differently.
But
I think, and it goes back to Monica's point about depth versus the network. And a better name might be, instead of digital natives, network natives.
Some people say
Because digital, at least to me, implies technology, and it's really about collaboration.
being connected.
Yeah. And it really means that you can't measure intelligence by how much you know, because it's skewed, because the person who has the most comfort and access to technology is the one who knows the most. So intelligence becomes something else, and that's why I think academia is suddenly saying, wait a minute, we don't really know if they've learned. But that's probably always been the case. We just assume that by asking them what they know, they're educated. But technology is doing that job for us, so intelligence has to go deeper than that.
That was going to be one of my points about the learning part of it or whatever. We might have this rosy idea of what it was, how much our students learned or whatever. Maybe in your case studies, maybe that's different. But for the vast majority, when we lecture to 200, 300 students, I mean, the assumption that they're engaged in involving reflection and higher thinking instead of thinking about their boyfriends or girlfriends or doing something else or writing a letter. Or I mean, we have this rosy idea where many students were bored to death in their large lecture halls at universities and whatever, and they weren't engaged. Now, the business school environment where there was cases and interaction and thinking might have been different. I think it comes back to questions and framing your class. I teach undergrads here. It's not large classes, 35, 40 students, which I guess I don't consider large. And we use a lot of technology and stuff, but I've had to reframe the assignments and the way we do things and whatever. I give quizzes every 2 weeks, open book, where they can bring anything that they want, but they can't Google during the class. They can Google before, they can save it, add value to it. So I wanted to reflect on it, not just to quickly give back. And then they have short questions, and it's the framing of the question that brings it together. So they're Googling, but not in that. And I just asked them to sign that they're not, because I don't know if they are or not. Anyway, so I had to restructure that. I do back channel in class, so I can control it rather than letting them do it themselves, and asking them to reflect back every 15 minutes. What's the back channel talking about? And doing it that way. In other words,
Mike, you're teaching the process and methodology, which go back to what Suresh is saying about reflecting. It's not really about the subject and the access. It's about the methodology and the process of thinking.
So what I'm
this is
saying
what we
is,
should change to
using
teach
the
them.
current methods, we can still get them to think and learn in the ways that we would like. In fact, I think we could do it even more than we used to. And we haven't even begun to, what Bob said I was going to infuse into this, is we've been talking about the interactions and stuff, but we haven't talked about freeing ourselves from place and time. Why do we have to do it in these classrooms anyway? Why do we have to do it all together and whatever? And when you start talking about alternative environments at distance and other things like that, maybe they can reflect more there, the Phoenix model, and why not do it in virtual worlds and things?
And I think, I think as Mark was saying, I mean, this is probably not that different. Some college classes have always been boring. And people have always just been like, well, I guess I better just memorize and go through the motions. The only thing that's changed is what's happened to the newspaper industry, is that now we're online and we can see nobody's reading these stories. We have to change the way we write them. It's the same thing.
But it's interesting, we're still linking information to knowledge. That's a fundamental different construct. Information is not knowledge.
No, it's not.
But if I give them a project, give them open-ended questions, seems the answers I get, I think they get the knowledge.
If your proposition is true, then there's no value for experience. How I absorb information is based on what information I already contain. How I see the world is already between my head, and I frame it, the frames that he's talking about.
But that's not how you do research on a project, right? You go out and do research on a project because you don't know the answer. So this is why project-based education has been really important for me. Is because what happens is that it gives the students then the ability to find information and then organize it.
Right.
And
then think about it
and then think about it, and this is actually why one of the things I do in large lecture halls is actually have a free write, much like you have quizzes, because I want to teach them that reading is not just having the book in front of your face, it's organizing your thoughts afterwards. Right?
Yeah, well, it was an introduction by Suresh. Actually, I was trying to get to a point where we could ask about the difference between information and knowledge, but also about the uniqueness of the school as an organizational or institutional unit that has that responsibility historically to see to that knowledge creation is happening. And my question would then be to, couldn't we identify that uniqueness in this new time and not trying to draw as many parallels as we can to running a school and running a business? My idea is I think that running a school is uniquely different from running a business, and knowledge is one of the key words in trying to circle in on that difference. I'm from Copenhagen Business School. One of the largest research departments is my department, the Department of Management, Politics and Philosophy. One of the biggest programs we have is management philosophy, one of the fastest growing. When I write a suggested syllabus to that course, it was kicked back by students saying they want more books, difficult books. They want the pleasure of slowness. They want the passion for inertia. Twitter is litter. So they want to have exactly the lecture as a time to really chew on things that they get to possibly learn.
I wonder if it's a matter of culture.
The question is,
It's Europe.
we need information
Interesting.
and we need to think about information. And their question is, but how am I actually thinking about something? What am I using when I'm thinking about
Americans
something?
consume far
And that's
media.
continuously a recurrent question in class there. And I think that's, it's not opposing to, or it's not the other ditch or anything, but I think it's part of a very interesting and relevant question to kind of reformulate the uniqueness of the university as an institution in present society. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if we're supposed to be thinking about education now. The way that math teachers don't spend as much time in the classroom teaching complicated procedures that your scientific or graphing calculator can do for you, in a way, you know, students of the future might say, well, I'm going to have my laptop or my mobile device with me all the time. I'm going to be able to look up knowledge all the time, or information.
Right.
So then is the way to think of about education to minimize the time you spend in the classroom teaching things that somebody can Google wherever they are. And then what does that leave you with? And I guess that's the thing you want to try to maximize, whatever's left.
Two fundamental questions, you know. Are they wired differently or not, and does it really matter? And we certainly know, regardless of whether they are or not, what are the implications for our organizations, including schools and businesses? Shannon, why don't you, what do you think? And do you find that the managers are adapting successfully, or they're having crises on that?
I see both. I mean, it really depends on the person. So, you know, people that are constantly looking for ways to do things better and improve are going to respond well, and people that are very fixed in their ways, you know, there may be a better environment someplace for them. But if they're going to be successful and kind of, you know, I work mostly with early stage technology companies, and in that scenario, definitely you need to be able to adapt and change your style to keep up with what's changing around you.
Great. Monica.
Yeah, I was thinking during the break, and we touched on this before as well, that, you know, as Mark brought up, maybe this isn't really just a generational thing. Oh, new generation, new way of doing things. Let's rethink. But in the way that the music industry, the TV industry, the movie industry, the news industry have all actually made, it's been, you know, revelations coming from technology about things that have been problematic, or the relationship with consumers. You know, people want to buy one song at a time and they want it cheap and they'll steal it if they have to. And it's the same with news. It's the same with a bunch of other things. So maybe what's happening is that this technology and the behavior of the digital natives is really just showing us problems and opportunities to better the work environment. And the academic environment that were always there and were just never revealed to us because the students and the employees and the young employees never had a voice that they have now. And they were always kind of put at the bottom of the ladder, and they had no way to talk to the suited man at the top, and now it's happening. And so maybe it's really not so much a new generation with new behaviors, but just a generation saying, I don't know if this is the right thing to do, you know, what about this and that and the other thing? Just kind of opening our minds to new ways of thinking and hopefully being more effective with those.
And we've seen it in our research through the behavior of the organization, how they react to different groups of digital natives. So you have different kinds of reaction to that. you have the authoritative reaction, which is the more kind of traditional industry business organization that says, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get loose of my control. It's my way or the highway. You have to adapt. You have to be as us and conform. And they're the more cautionary or responsive and saying, let's wait, let's see what's happening and react during the adaptive one. And the engaging one says, let's go for it. You know, they're more productive, right? So what do we care if they're multitasking? What do we care if there are different ways of doing things? Saying all this, there are individual characteristics that we need to take into consideration and not, you know, generalize it fully. But I do think it's the behavior that should interest us, and it's not a technology matter only.
We've covered a lot of ground. Again, I want to thank the panel for their efforts. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I thank the audience for your contributions. I do think, yes, thank you, please. Thank you, everybody. I do think when we haven't just raised questions, we have resolved something. There is something profound going on here that it is changing our world, if not has changed it already. Our organizations need to change. Certainly our educational institutions need to change as we move forward.